I believe we're live at this point in time. Greetings, friends. This is the second in a number of occasional interviews with Ibrahim Kazerouni and myself, Rob Prince. We've been doing a regular monthly program at KGNU, Hemispheres Middle East Dialogues, for the past 11 years. Ibrahim is also a regular contributor to KGNU's International News Roundup each month. Ibrahim is currently an imam at the Islamic Center in Dearborn, Michigan, said to be the largest mosque in North America. He has a joint PhD in religion and social change from the University of Denver Korbel School of International Studies and the Iliff School of Theology in Denver. He's originally from Najaf, Iraq. Myself, I'm a retired senior lecturer in international studies at the same Korbel School of International Studies, where I taught for 23 years. I'm originally from a large Jewish family that emigrated to the United States in the early 20th century, and I'm a retired Peace Corps volunteer and staff member in Tunisia. So we have entitled this program, Zionism's Failed Ideology, where it originated and where it's headed. But let's begin, Ibrahim, with the possibilities of negotiations, the latest damage report. What is the latest news?
Well, good evening to everyone. Good evening, Rob. I think the news up to about a couple of hours ago was the usual atrocities committed by the Israelis against residential areas, hitting buildings and primarily civilians. And in response, Hamas is hitting and militaries. There was days ago, just beginning of this week, the possibility that the Israelis might be going into Gaza for invasion of Gaza, but that was denied. I think because the Israelis thought about a calculation of the possible damages that they're going to have in such a close quarter fighting with the Palestinians. At the moment, the latest news, couple of hours, we began to hear that there might be possibility of ceasefire. The Egyptians are trying to somehow organize a ceasefire between Hamas and the Israelis that would stop all these bloodshed. However, I'm not quite sure. I mean, the Israelis have attacked Gaza so many times and have promised a number of things for each ceasefire, only to violate them within a week or two. So I'm not sure whether this is going to last. Particularly, both sides have clearly indicated that if any firing by the others or violation of it, that becomes something that it gives them a green light to continue with it. How about you, Rob? I mean, anything as far as the Biden administration? What is it up to now?
Well, there have been hints from the Biden administration that it is quietly, very quietly, one might say, putting pressure on Israel to accept a ceasefire. This administration's stance, however, when you look more closely, is not much different at all from the previous wars, and in most ways. How so? Pretty much total support for Israel, blaming the fighting on the Palestinians as usual. We have to remember the U.S. arms and finances Israel, the biggest recipient of U.S. aid, military and economic aid. There was a report in the last day of the United States providing Israel with $750 million in weaponry to restore the weaponry that Israel's already used in this current round of fighting. At the same time, the United States continues to prevent the UN Security Council from implementing any resolution which not just punishes but criticizes Israel. If those things come up, it vetoes it. Put clearly, it's the same old in terms of U.S. support of Israel. Keep in mind that with one telephone call from Joe Biden, this would end the Israeli bombardment. It appeared, well, I don't know, but up until today, it appeared like this wasn't going to happen, and that one of the reasons it wasn't going to happen is that if this fighting ended right now, it would appear that that Israel has lost this war, and so the United States is still looking for a way to find some angle that they can say that Israel has won. There are a lot of reasons why the United States would want a ceasefire, but it's the same old in the sense that they want a ceasefire on Israeli terms. All right. And I don't think that's going to happen this time because we're in a whole new ball game in the wars between Israel and the Palestinians. There's a lot of articles that have been speaking, Ibrahim, about the Zionist project in Palestine, not just the current fighting, but going back, looking into the future. Is it safe to say, is it exaggerating to say that the original Zionist project has failed?
Well, before I address the original Zionist project, but you mentioned something, Rob, that this is a whole new ball game, and indeed it is. If you consider a teeny tiny Gaza that is considered to be literally close, just over 2 million population in a concentration camp. And yet they are able to define even the number of, the amount of food that goes into Gaza is controlled. There are no exit points for it. And yet they are able to import or to develop these sophisticated weapons that has responded to the Israelis again and again during the last attack. This is a remarkable achievement for them. This is why it has changed the whole thing in a new dynamic that the Israelis are now beginning to think twice about dealing with Gaza and attacking Gaza. But this is something that we can spend another program on it. To understand whether this is exaggerated or not, we really need to go and read a little bit about the Zionist project or the Zionist policy within the Middle East, particularly with regard to the Palestinian issue or Middle East in general. An article appeared in, I believe, 1982 under the title Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. It was written, I believe, Rob, many months, I think a couple of years ago, we discussed this between us, by Oded Yinon, if you remember the name. It's the title of a Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. It was translated by Israel Shahak. If you read that, it says the plan operation, the Zionist plan for the Middle East operates on two essential premises. Number one, Israel must become an imperial regional power and effect the division of the whole area into a small state by the solution of all the Arab states. These are the two policies.
Right. Yeah.
And if you look at this article, which is probably about 15 pages long, when it comes to the Palestinians, it's interesting. It says, within Israel, the distinction between areas of 67 and the territories beyond them, those of 48, has always been meaningless for the Arabs and nowadays no longer has any significance for us. It should be clear. The problem should be seen in its entirety without any division as of 67. It should be clear. under any future political situation or military constellation, that the solution of the problem of the indigenous Arabs will come only when they recognize the existence of Israel in a secure border up to Jordan River and beyond.
Oh.
And this was, if you go back to the early 1950s and certainly in 1960s, these were put into different kind of narratives by Ben Gurion and Golda Meir. That what they were asking for, particularly in Golda Meir's doctrine, is that the melting of the Palestinians into non-existence. The only way they could succeed, the Zionists could succeed, was literally that myth of land without people and people without land to be recreated by how they to do it, by literally melting and destroying the Palestinians. Now we have, after 73 years of war and atrocities, not only the Palestinians have not gone and melted away and spirited away, now we have Palestinians in concentration camp taking the war to the Israelis. And they have to understand the new reality, where what they wanted to remove the distinction between 67, Gaza, and 48, and somehow create a separate entity that they could deal with. This conflict has united the Palestinians into a single entity. Yesterday, it was a total shutdown. The Arabs of 48, the West Bank, and Gaza. Total shutdown. All the shops, everything was shut down. And it was something that really drove home to the Israelis that they are risking another intifada, but with a difference, that this intifada is not just in the West Bank and Gaza. This intifada is going to bring the Arabs of 1948 with them. So if under this policy, if the Zionist policy was to remove Palestinians and turn them into non-entity, after 73 years, unfortunately for them, fortunately for Palestinians, they have failed. So it's not an exaggeration. It is safe to assume that the Zionist policy is not something that we are talking about. It even the Jewish leaders within Israel are talking about that. That it's about time we address that myth of land without people and people without land, and we go back to quote unquote what they are saying, that to humane Judaism,
Right.
detached from Zionism.
Yeah, we'll talk about
and
that
you
more.
were right. Yeah,
Mhm.
and you were right.
Yes.
You crafted a unique expression for it. You said that de-zionization of Judaism.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit later in the program. I think it's important. Yeah. So I'd like to add a couple things about what you just said, because some of it, there's several things that have been missing from the discussion here in the United States for the most part. One of the things that's been missing is what you just referred to, the fact that the Palestinians in the three separated geographic areas, that of 1948, the West Bank and Gaza, that they've come together, and that's something that the Israelis have always tried to prevent. I.e., part of their strategy is another example of divide and conquer. Keep what this unified people, keep them from being unified. And in that sense, it's if you like a microcosm of the divide and conquer policies of colonizers pretty much everywhere. The second factor that I hear very, very little about, and we've talked about in our programs on KGNU repeatedly, and people don't seem to appreciate it. And what that is a shift in the balance of forces in the region itself. that has been taking place, and the role that has played in terms of giving the Palestinians both the material means of fighting back, but also politically the confidence that they're not alone. And this is something that we'll come back to again and again and again on our radio program. But having said that, look, let's really get down to basics here. What has Zionism been from the outset until today? It's a form of settler colonialism. That's it. That's the heart of the project, and that's, if you like, that's a contradiction it's not ever been able to get over. And in that sense, Israel resembles South Africa. Quite frankly, it resembles what happened here in the United States, Australia, places like that. And when you understand that this is the nature of Zionism, a form of settler colonialism, then terms like ethnic cleansing, apartheid, they make more sense, because this has always been the goal, if you like, of the Zionist project. And in fact,
can I interject here?
Sure, yeah.
Can I interject?
Yes, go right
ahead. The Israeli ambassador in Dublin was invited to go to the Irish Parliament, and he was grilled by one of the members of Parliament about this particular issue. And he said that I've been to the Holy Land, this is his word, and I have seen what you call the apartheid and the double standard that you have. One lane for the Israelis and the European, another lane for Palestinians, and how much they have to wait. So, and he said that if I had my way, I would have expelled you from Ireland. It was very strong language.
Yeah.
And this poor fellow really did not have anything to say. Right.
Well, this is the true nature of the project. Of course, in the heat of the battle, it's not a battle. In the heat of this situation where Israel is pounding Gaza and indiscriminate bombing, which is all they seem to know how to do these days. The issue, what is it that is dissolving? First of all, the notion of Israel as, quote, the only democracy in the Middle East. I think that's just become dust, if you like. Also the myth that this is a progressive country. What we're seeing is, and not just in this particular incident. So we could talk about 2014 and 2008 and 2002 and et cetera, et cetera. And what we're seeing is a kind of inhumanity and brutality that is really second to none in the world. The longest military occupation in modern history, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to kind of continue with kind of probing this whole question of Zionism. And look, I like many Jewish people, as a kid, I went to Hebrew school. I grew up with this myth. I was looking at pictures of photos from my youth, and I found one of my aunts used to take my cousins and me. She took us to the United Nations. We took boat rides around Manhattan. I am from New York City. But she took us to a movie twice, and that movie was Exodus. And that movie really shaped the mentality of my generation, particularly, certainly among the Jewish kids, but actually far more broadly. And it's that image of Exodus that is collapsing before our very eyes. And you had mentioned earlier this whole idea of the notion of a people without a land, i.e. supposedly the European Jews, with a land without a people, supposedly Palestine. And you got to think about this, because this is the fundamental idea of Zionism right here, okay? That Jews didn't have a land, that's true. But where was it that Jews suffered a kind of oppression that's almost unthinkable. It's in Europe, all right. It's not in Palestine, and then the land without a people. Well, it just so happens that it was populated heavily, and not only was it populated, but it was also modernizing. If you like the market economy sense of the term, it was a very rich place, so to speak. So, but when you start saying there's a land without a people, think of that. That is denying the existence of an entire group of people. Or that is a profoundly racist notion. And in the case of the Zionist project, it was to implement, to make sure that this land didn't have the people that originally was there. So
that's why, Rob,
yeah.
When I was looking at the strategy for Israel in the 1980s, it goes back, the author, Oded goes back to that idea, the fundamental, pivotal principle in Zionism. They started with a myth, but that myth had to become a reality. And the only way they could do it is by first in 1948 by killing and expelling 750,000 or close to 1 million, and even now after Oslo, over 500,000, according to this, to the Irish member of parliament, gave statistics to the Israeli ambassador, that you have expelled from their land and you have pushed them out, by destroying their land and so on and so forth. So that myth that originally started now had to become a reality. This war has come back to haunt them.
Yes,
that now,
right.
So long as Palestinians are there and Palestinians are prepared to fight for their cause, that kind of reality, that myth remains a myth, and that reality is going to come to dictate the agenda and the new ball game that we have.
Yeah, and if you keep this in mind, Ibrahim, it helps explain what we're seeing today in Israel, and that is a frenzy of racism. These settlers who are coming in, lynching Palestinians, the very way that Israel is executing its bombing missions against Palestine. If it was any other country in the world, this would be completely unacceptable. And the only reason, quite frankly, that it is acceptable is that Israel has an enabler, and the two of us are sitting in the country of that enabler, the United States. None of this would be happening if the United States didn't support Israel. So we need to, of course, keep that connection.
Noam Chomsky, Noam Chomsky recently gave an interview echoing exactly the same principle, that without the coverage that the United States is giving to Israel, it would absolutely not have been able to do any of its atrocities against willful. What is the myth? Not only the myth of people without land has gone out. Now the so-called secular state, because from 1948 they were promising the Palestinians within the 48 territory that now you are part of the state of Israel and your right is the same as anybody else's. When they see now on the broad daylight extreme Zionists attacking Palestinians and even killing a few of them, now they are put literally, as the president of Israel said what Netanyahu has done, or what this war is doing, putting Israelis against Israelis. And that is eating into the whole foundation of a state that they wanted to build on that occupied territory.
Yes, and in fact, the Palestinians in 48 have systematically been not called Palestinians. They've been referred to as Israeli Arabs in order to separate them, if you like, in such a way.
Yes.
So there's, with all this in mind, let's take a look at the current situation. Ibrahim, and what you see happening. I have a kind of my eyes bother me a little bit. Please excuse me for that. But let's go on. This is a rather unusual moment.
I mean, like every other war that had happened against Gaza, Israel has lost the public relation aspect in the war. Now we are seeing huge amount of rallies, demonstrations in different parts. Even you had one in Denver last week, and we had one last Sunday.
Memory. I've never seen anything like it in Denver, Colorado.
We had one in Detroit. And around the world. So public relation, the pictures of now babies that have been mutilated and totally to pieces are all over the world. So the Israelis have lost public relation. Now, in addition to public relation, lost in their public relation, they are now being hit hard when you have for the first time in history of Israel, its airports have been shut down, no flights in and out.
Right.
They moved the flights to the obscure small airports here or somewhere else. They were hit. The gas platform in the Mediterranean was hit. The gas pipelines and oil pipelines were hit. Military bases were hit. Today, one of the biggest drones that the Gazans have produced goes into Israel for a distance of nearly 60, 70 miles, takes pictures of what is around Gaza, and comes back to Gaza without being hit or without being attacked. So it clearly states that really Israelis are finding themselves in a huge pickle, as we say. You want to add something?
Well, I think you've described it pretty well. It's when I look at the situation, what I'm seeing is the limits of Israeli military power. They've got, needless to say, an arsenal second to none in the region, and yet that's the only card they seem to have in their deck is, bomb, bomb, bomb. And in this case, my sense is they played that card at the wrong time. But they don't know any other kind of a card to play. What I'm looking at in this particular case, what makes this case different, which you've already mentioned, is the fact that for the first time, the Palestinians have brought the war inside of the 1948 boundaries of Palestine, i.e., into Israel. And that is new, and it comes at a time when the pundits, as you like to call them, Ibrahim, have written off the Palestinian movement, that the Palestinian movement is weak and it's divided, and by the way, even if it was weak and divided, it still has justice on its side. But the speed with which the three areas, Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel within its 1967 borders has united is really startling. So that brings us back to this whole question of a ceasefire. Of course, how can you be against ceasefire? But in the past, let's look at how ceasefires actually functioned. Israel would go to war against the Palestinians, whether it was in the West Bank or Gaza. It would maximize its position, and then it would call for a ceasefire, having gained whatever it was its political goals are. This time, what it looks like from here, and admittedly, I'm sitting in Denver, Colorado, but this is still how it looks, is that the Palestinians are demanding, in return for a ceasefire, there have to be political concessions on Israel's part. And what I've read, both from Israeli and Palestinian sources, is there are at least two issues that are non-negotiable. One is stop the attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and protect it. And as in one of our recent conversations we had, I knew that Al-Aqsa has been attacked prior to this past episode, but I was really stunned, Ibrahim, when you told me that it had been attacked. Was it 56 times or 57 times in the last?
Yes, 75. Yes, 75 times.
75 times. Okay, so that's one issue.
Yes, 75 times.
All right. The second issue is they have to stop with the confiscations of property in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of Jerusalem. So those seems to me that those issues seem to me to be pretty non-negotiable from the Palestinian side. Is that accurate, or am I off base, Ibrahim?
No, you're right, Rob. I mean, it's not. I just want to go back to one thing that you mentioned earlier. It's not just the uniting of the Palestinians within 48, Gaza and West Bank. What is happening that the old leadership is losing power. The younger ones
among the Palestinians.
The authority.
Yeah, the Palestinian Authority.
Circumventing. Yes. Yeah, the Fatah. No, I mean what I saw with comment being made by the younger generations in the West Bank clearly indicated that they have no trust and no hope from the from Abbas or anybody else, and they accuse them as collaborators, etc. Now the younger generation within Gaza are literally molding together with the younger generations within West Bank, and the younger generation within 48, which makes it an explosive kind of situation, because now the Israelis are unable to use the old groups such as Abbas, Fatah, or anybody else to put pressure on everybody and get things down. This is why Egyptians have been, during the past week, nearly 10 or 15 times have been going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Why? Because it's now not the old group that they have to deal with that capitulated.
That's right.
It's the younger one.
Are they talking to Abbas? They're actually talking to Hamas and the other groups. Are they talking to Abbas? I mean, what authority does Abbas have in this situation?
No.
They're not even talking to him.
Nothing. They are talking to Hamas.
Right. All right, a couple of things here. You know,
a
couple years ago,
with regard to political climb down, those 2 points that you indicated, they said that they need Israelis to undertake, that they are going to stay away from Masjid al-Aqsa and to stop taking land from the Palestinians within West Bank, particularly within Jerusalem, and turning it into settlement zone. So let's see if the Israelis are going to agree to it.
All right, so a couple just of additional points on this before moving on. A number of years ago, Angela Davis was granted an award in Birmingham, Alabama, and then through the work of some of the Zionist elements in the town, the award was taken away from her, and she went to Birmingham and managed to unite not just young blacks and old blacks, because there was a difference there, but they came together, but also blacks and Jews, blacks and others. It was really a kind of a coalition that we hadn't seen for a while. And she gets her award back. But more important than that was she was asked point blank, why is it that you support the Palestinians? And I thought her answer just really hit the nail on the head. She says, how can you not support them? They're so resilient. You know, you keep getting hammered and hammered and hammered. And each time they get hammered, they come back stronger. It really is incredible when you see what this people has gone through. And really, we could talk about 48, but as you and I know, we could go back long before that in terms of the mistreatment of Palestinians by the Zionists, by the British, by the Ottomans, etc. It's really an incredible thing to see how they've been able to come forth and like a phoenix, if you like, emerging again and again and again. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see what's really happening in terms of the shuttle diplomacy, whatever going on now. It's the Israelis who are on the defensive, and basically what they're looking for is a face-saving gesture. They do not want to admit the defeat, the political defeat that they are suffering right now, and so they're trying to look for a way, to somehow extract something to say
pull a rabbit.
That's right. They're literally.
To pull
that's
a
what I
rabbit
see
out
them
of
doing.
a hat.
And it's such an ironic thing because
Yeah,
the military imbalance is so great, and yet politically, I don't think it might sound strange to some of the listeners, those watching. They've lost. They've lost politically. They have lost this battle. Well, look, let's move on. Because in the midst of all this, do you have any sense of where Zionism is heading? What is the future, if you like, of this? I don't know what to call it. This connection, love, hate, war, peace connection between the Zionist movement and Palestinian people. Where's it headed?
Well, let me start. We have a tradition within our faith that says a just cause is not going to die as long as somebody is calling for it or defending it. So if the Zionist project was hoping that after 10 years, 20, 30, 50 years, Palestinians will no longer be around and the whole issue will be forgotten. That has not happened. Palestinians are going to be around. As you said, you talked about their resilience, and they keep coming back again and again. I think the only solution that we have is to go back to pre-Zionist project, a land that is shared by huge number of people that happen to be with different faith. That's the only way we can get solution in that critical part of the world, where we don't
when
have
you say
to go
that,
over
you're already
war.
rejecting this idea of pushing the Jews into the sea, this hysteria that you often hear from Zionists, right? That there's a place. There's a place.
Yeah, I mean, or pushing the Palestinians out.
Or pushing the Palestinians into the desert.
They both have these myths. Yeah, they all have their myth. But once we go back, we go out of this straitjacket that we have created for ourselves, and we say this is land for people to live side by side as they used to live for millennia or centuries, whatever, and with different faith. That's the only way. Otherwise, which means literally removing Zionism and Zionist project from the Middle East. That's the only alternative that we have. You want to say something?
Yes. I guess you could call me a secular Jew. All right. My family, I come from a big Jewish family. I've never rejected that part of my heritage, and I've studied. I won't say I've studied the religious history. I've studied some of it, but I've studied the social history of the Jews in some depth. And number one, Judaism has been around for a while, at least 2,000 years, probably more. Maybe you could add another 700 or 800 years to that. Who knows? And for almost all of that time, until the last century, Zionism was, if you like, a spiritual longing a longing for, if you like, a spiritual homeland. It had nothing to do with a political state or a political system. Now, needless to say, that particularly, well, in my case, I think really the '67 war was really there was a watershed where Zionism itself becomes such an important factor within Judaism. But the point here is that Zionism is a very recent movement and a very recent phenomena within Judaism. And I am one of those who sees that the future of Judaism, and I believe it will have a future, is a de-Zionized future. And what do I mean by that? Zionism, by its very nature, the guy who really wrote the best about this, in my mind, a Jewish guy, was a Tunisian Jew named Albert Memmi, who some of your listeners and followers might know. He was influenced by Sartre and some of those French left intellectuals in the 40s and 50s. But he basically, yes. Memmi basically sees the relationship between Zionism and the Palestinians as one between the oppressor and the oppressed. And then he kind of builds on some of the thinkings of a German philosopher, Hegel. And what he argues is the idea is not for the oppressed to become the oppressor, i.e., in the case, not for the Palestinians to dominate over the Jews in Palestine. It's quite different than that. It's to destroy that relationship in which there is an oppressor and an oppressed. I really don't know what form politically the future will take, but whatever form it is, it has to be Judaism has to be de-Zionized, and not only in Israel and Palestine, but quite frankly, it's infected as well. American Judaism and Judaism around the world. And until recently, there were very, very few voices that within the religious Jewish community that took this position. But I think that I know that there are a growing number of Jewish religious thinkers who are beginning to think along those lines. And the interesting thing is that in the midst of this war, we're beginning to see articles and statements beginning to what is this project and how did it get so far off course from what it even claimed to be. So I in the long run,
Rob,
I agree with you
Rob,
about what the future should look like.
Rob, the Zionist project was clear from the beginning. It didn't go off course. This is part of Zionism, because once you are a settler and you want to remove the native, as it happened in the United States, you want to remove them, you have to go through massacre after massacre after massacre and bloodshed and war to reduce their number and ultimately remove them to the margin, and they become non-existent. So it was part of the project. What we are calling about that, look, guys, 73 years of war is enough to prove to you that this project is not going to succeed in the Middle East. Is not going to succeed in the Middle East. The only way we can bring peace, yes, peace and tranquility is to go back to the humane faith.
Right. That's right.
To go back to the humane faith of living side by side. Living side by side with different, with peoples of other faith. That's the only thing we can do it. The only way we can do it.
So obviously we're far from there right now, but I do think that this is what this war has brought out. It's if you like, it's ripped the mask off of the illusion, the myth of Zionism, and we see its harsh, to put it mildly, reality. And we have to say, okay, this is a 21st century. This can't continue. Ibrahim, I think we've had a pretty good discussion, you and I. Do you have anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, thank you very much. I hope
All right.
everybody, all the listeners would come to work together to establish that possibility of everybody living in peace in the Holy Land.
All right. Well, with that, thank you very much, those of you that have participated in this. And this
Thank
program
you.
will appear tomorrow or the next day, both on Facebook and on YouTube. So good night to everybody. Good night, Ibrahim.